Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 9th of September. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with a heavy sandstorm plaguing Israel and the rest of the Middle East that is continuing to disrupt air traffic and cause health complications, with hospitals nationwide reporting an upsurge in admissions. We get more in this report from IBA's Dennis Zinn.
Tel Aviv, August 2015. A midsummer day with a sandstorm unprecedented in the country's records, and one that is plaguing the entire Middle East. And this is Jerusalem. Weather experts are at a loss how to explain the phenomenon that arrived here via Syria. Air flights within the country have been suspended until further notice, and health authorities issued warnings to residents to remain indoors as much as possible. And hospitals reported an increase of hundreds of patients who arrived with severe breathing difficulties.
It's difficult.
However, not everyone was complaining.
This is beautiful weather. This is a sandstorm, which I never seen, and it's lovely. You don't need to see anything. You just think and imagine how beautiful it is. So, well, it's no problem.
It's quite hot here, I think 15 degrees more than in Germany. It's very cloudy, that was not expected. I was guessing sun is shining, feels a bit polluted, I don't know. What is it about? Makes running hard.
People across the Middle East posted pictures online of huge clouds of dust billowing through the region. In some places, visibility was down to just a few hundred meters. Egypt closed the Suez Canal because of the dangers inherent in poor visibility. Lebanon's health ministry reported that 2 people had already died as a result of the storm, and in Syria the Red Cross organization reported a sharp decrease in the number of airstrikes, thanks to the storm. The dust is expected to start settling tomorrow and continue over the weekend, but the weather forecasters said that the process will take time due to the hot, dry, windless weather. However, after they failed to predict the onset of the storm, who's going to trust that they know when it's going to end? Dennis Zinn, IBA News.
A manhunt is underway for the Palestinian gunman who opened fire in a car driven by an Israeli this morning near the Tappuach Junction in Samaria. Even though the bullets penetrated the vehicle, the female driver escaped without physical injury but was treated for shock. Army units quickly deployed to the scene and conducted a search for the gunman. The U.S. congressional debate on the Iranian nuclear agreement is now underway, with leading lawmakers on both sides speaking out about the issue.
For many, this has been a very difficult decision. For some, it was made even more difficult by assertions from the administration that the only choice was between this agreement and war. Of course, that was never true.
It is time for Congress to reject the JCPOA and for the administration to negotiate a new agreement, as has been done so many times in the past when the Senate raised serious concerns. The stakes are simply too high, the risks too great for us to do otherwise.
When the Senate is gavelled into session in just a few hours, a debate has ignited passions from Tehran to Tel Aviv, from Beijing to Berlin, and from coast to coast across our great country will take center stage in the world's greatest deliberative body. The question at hand is no small matter. Is the agreement between Iran and the international community, led by the United States, the best pathway to peace and security for America, Israel, our partners and interests? I believe the answer is unquestionably yes. And today I'm gratified to say to my fellow Americans, our negotiating partners and our allies all around the world, this agreement will stand. America will uphold its commitment and will seize this opportunity to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Tonight we are on the eve of the start of the House debate on the JCPOA with Iran. We have gathered with military veterans and Gold Star families to express our strong support for this historic agreement. We stand here united in observance of this transformational nuclear agreement, an agreement founded not on trust, but on verification, vigilance, and enforcement. We congratulate the President on this agreement, and we observe that the united determination of the global community was able to bring Iran to the table to agree to these sweeping reductions and unprecedented inspections.
I think it's a very bad deal because I believe it puts the Iranians on the path to nuclear weapons in 10 years, a blink of an eye in the Middle East. But I'm very more concerned, or is concerned, about the implications of this agreement as we basically legitimize this regime, which is the world's greatest sponsor of terror. And that, frankly, is what keeps me awake at night.
Officials at the White House say that the administration of President Barack Obama is pleased by the support of the 41 senators who have pledged to back the accord.
The administration is gratified by the growing support that we've seen in the United States Congress for the international agreement to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Well, we certainly would expect that those members of Congress who support the agreement to take the necessary steps in Congress to prevent Congress from undermining the agreement.
According to the American Enterprise Institute, former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney warned that the deal with Tehran could have catastrophic results.
This vote in Congress will have profound consequences. Approval of this agreement will not prevent a nuclear Iran. Along with a pathway to a nuclear arsenal, President Obama's agreement will provide Iran with funds and weapons the regime will use for the support of terror, the dominance of the Middle East, and the furtherance of Tehran's effort to destroy Israel, threaten Arab regimes, and prevent the United States from defending our allies and our interest in the Persian Gulf and beyond. With the removal of restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile program, this agreement will give Iran the means to launch a nuclear attack on the U.S. homeland. I know of no nation in history that has agreed to guarantee that the means of its own destruction will be in the hands of another nation, particularly one that is hostile. What President Obama is asking the United States Congress to do is unique, historically and dangerously unique. The results could well be catastrophic.
Cheney's speech was briefly interrupted by a protester from the Code Pink anti-war group who shouted that he was wrong about Iraq, so why should he be listened to now about Iran? She was booed and yelled at by the audience for the outburst and removed from the venue. Since U.S. President Barack Obama already has enough votes to sustain a veto of any resolution disapproving the deal, why would Congress bother to spend so much time debating it? That's the question IBA's Efrat Patat asked of Jerusalem's former ambassador to Washington, Danny Ayalon.
We have to remember we are about 14 months before elections, presidential elections, of course, congressional elections, and this is time where I believe each of the political parties in the United States, namely Republicans and Democrats, are trying to score points. And Israel would be wise not to get into this political crossfire between the two parties, which was not the case in the last few months.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu landed in London a short time ago ahead of his meeting with British Prime Minister David Cameron tomorrow. As he was boarding a plane to London, he said that the European Union should stop pressuring and attacking Israel, which he said is the only true defense that Europe has against radical Islam. Netanyahu said that the war on radical Islam will be the focus of his discussions with Cameron, and that Israel is ready to act together with Europe, but that would require a change in attitude. Visiting European Council President Donald Tusk held separate meetings with President Reuven Rivlin and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem yesterday evening. Rivlin promised that Israel will do its part to alleviate the refugee crisis, while Netanyahu emphasized security concerns and the importance of renewing the Middle East peace process. Tusk described the dramatic refugee crisis and also vowed to oppose any European boycotts against Israel.
State, and as a democratic state, I am proud of the humanitarian aid we have given to thousands of refugees throughout the years. Israel is ready to continue this important work and I believe could provide relief to a proportionate number of these fleeing. Whether in Europe or in the Middle East, we cannot allow fundamentalists to dictate how we live and must continue to find a way to live together.
Of course, this dramatic crisis is also about wider context, of course. It's about economy, it's about security, not only the security of the European borders, but security also in some countries in your regions, in your region, and of course about some phenomena, social phenomena.
I think that there is much that common challenges that we face, and in this regard I find it perplexing that some in Europe are still possessed by the anti-Israeli obsession. Nothing is happening. Hundreds of thousands are being slaughtered in the Middle East. Millions are being displaced, but some in Europe believe the only thing they have to do is to press, boycott, and vilify the Middle East only true democracy, Israel. No.
I think that we have to avoid words like boycott, because for sure this is not the intention of Europe, and I'm absolutely sure that there's no country in Europe which wants to boycott Israel or for me it's absolutely obvious and clear that in fact the essence of our relationship this is quite opposite.
Turning to Germany, where hundreds of migrants poured across its borders again today in an influx that shows no sign of abating. Volunteers in Lower Saxony were filmed offering water and meals to the thousands who lined up at registration stations every day. At least 800,000 people are expected to flow into the country this year, which would be double the number that was forecast last January and 4 times the amount as in 2014. The United Nations announced that at least 850,000 migrants are expected to cross the Mediterranean Sea this coming year in search of better lives in Europe. Members of the European Parliament are preparing to vote on the first proposal from the European Commission today aimed at relocating 40,000 of the refugees who are currently in Italy and Greece. Germany and Sweden are pressing the 28-member bloc to absorb the migrants more equitably. While some members argue that this serves as a test case of measures to address the crisis, others argue against potential risks posed by the mass migration.
And relocating 40,000 people from Italy and Greece is not a big task. If we fail at that small but important task, then how are we going to succeed at other tasks that lie ahead? Because indeed we also need to look at structural problems. We need to act together much more than just relocating 40,000.
Migrant well-being should not come at the cost of EU citizens' well-being. Specifically threats where the potential terrorists, as we've already seen, can enter countries unhindered and unchecked and move around the continent, as will be the case with this mechanism. This is a short-term, knee-jerk response to solving a problem with a quick fix, rather than addressing the origins, including existing causal EU policies. That's what needs to happen.
As the European Union convenes to discuss ways to tackle the refugee crisis, IBA's Efrat Batat discussed ramifications of the situation with Dr. Tali Kritzman Amir, who is an expert on migrant affairs from the College of Law and Business.
We've been seeing is first a very dramatic restriction of several European countries, several attempts to block immigrants from reaching their countries or somehow limiting their freedom of movement. But then we saw also a backlash. We saw a lot of resistance from civilian population to those restrictions. And we saw some responses from European leaders saying that they're willing to take in some asylum seekers into their countries and so on. So what I hope we will see in the next few days is that European leaders will take some responsibility and will be willing to accept asylum seekers, even if they reached other European countries before coming to their countries, as a way to burden of caring for asylum seekers. I think that's the moral obligation of the stronger European countries that at this point in time have fewer refugees to take care of than the weaker European countries.
And what are the potential consequences of an inadequate European Union response?
Well, I think the potential consequences would be that the countries that are worse off, such as Greece and Italy, in terms of their economy, will have to deal with this influx. Because of their economic situation, they will not be able to give proper protection to the refugees within our territories. So we will see a continuing response of people gathering in the streets, homelessness, and maybe even further detentions, instead of attempts to assimilate the refugees and actually give them proper protection and proper provision of their human rights.
Can you briefly just take us through the process of what happens to these individuals who make it into a safe haven, supposedly? What happens next? What's the process of absorbing them?
So right now the process in some countries includes periods of detention. It depends on the country. It could be from several days to several months. And afterwards their asylum applications are being determined. When we're discussing European countries, rates of recognition of refugees are relatively high. We're talking about more than 10% acceptance rates. Depending on the countries, it can even be 40% acceptance rates. Once an asylum application is accepted, a person is eligible to a set of rights, whether it's language classes or housing or ability to work or other in-kind donations that are given from the state. So it really varies from one state to another, but basically once a person is recognized as refugee, he or she is granted a rather generous set of rights.
Hussein Yusuf Hassin Khalifa was today convicted and sentenced to life in prison by the Nazareth District Court for the murder of Shelley Dadon, the Israeli Arab taxi driver from the Galilee village of Ibilin. Had admitted to killing the 19-year-old, although his attorneys tried to have that confession tossed out on claims that it was made while their client was sleep-deprived and under stress. Dadon went missing May 1st, 2014, on her way to a job interview in Migdal HaEmek. According to the Shin Bet security service, Khalifa picked her up in his taxi on the way, but instead took her to a deserted parking lot where he stabbed her to death. His later attempts to clean the vehicle failed, and physical evidence linked him to the crime. Execute him. That was the decision of a Kansas jury who sentenced white supremacist Fraser Glenn Cross to death for murdering 3 people outside of 2 Jewish community centers last year. The 74-year-old former member of the Ku Klux Klan was convicted last month of the shooting deaths of his non-Jewish victims who happened to be near the centers when he opened fire. The jury also found Cross guilty on 3 counts of attempted murder for shooting at other people. Cross admitted to the killing, saying that he wanted to kill as many Jews as possible. He kept his back to the jury during the sentencing, although after hearing his fate, he turned to the jurors and thanked them. The customary sound of celebratory gunfire at events in Jordan are now designated a crime. After a video of a 6-year-old boy being accidentally shot to death at a wedding in Irbid mid-August went viral, widespread public outcry prompted the Attorney General to reclassify festive firing as an offense, carrying with it a 10-year term in prison for fatal shootings. Such deaths have been a long-standing problem in the Arab world, and in the Hashemite Kingdom there have been an average of 2 to 3 deaths a year over the past decade. 3 people were shot to death and 40 injured just last year alone. Plainclothes police officers are now patrolling wedding halls and other events to ensure compliance with the new restrictions. The Jordanian parliament is also set to begin a discussion on a tough new gun law aimed at cracking down on the more than 1 million unlicensed weapons believed to be in the hands of the population of 7 million. Here at home, and good news for those who enjoy sipping spirits from time to time, Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon has announced that the liquor taxes were sharply reduced as of midnight last night. Levies on beer have been dropped by a whopping 46%, while there's been a 21% cut on hard alcohol. The ruling effectively reverses the increases that were imposed in both 2012 and 2013. Kachlon says that the latest break for the nation's consumers accompanies last week's reduction in value-added and corporate taxation that will help to lower the cost of living. The cuts are expected to cost the government an estimated annual loss of some 250 million shekels. The National Authority Against Controlled Substances blasted the lowering of alcohol prices, calling the decision dangerous. The chairman, Eitan Gomi, says that the decision contradicts global trends on the war against alcoholism and predicted that the nation will regret this move for years. And it was a great day on the market, with the shekel increasing in strength against all major foreign currencies, and share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange up across the board this afternoon. Here's a look at the numbers. Turning to the weather, and tomorrow will be unseasonably hot and muggy with no significant change in temperatures. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow, and Laura Cornfield will be at this desk. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a cool evening, and shalom from Jerusalem.